We at RTI are proud to offer our partners the next level of commercial automation and control simplicity with the new KX4 in-wall touch panel with built-in control processor. Ideal for single-room commercial applications such as meeting rooms, classrooms, and lecture halls, the KX4 combines an in-wall touch panel and hard button controls with a built-in control processor. The result is an enhanced automation solution that combines control simplicity with power in a single cost-effective unit. For front panel control, the KX4 boasts a 4-inch high-resolution capacitive touch display with 5 configurable hard buttons that can be customized with RTI's Laser Shark engraving. The built-in control processor features advanced capabilities including support for two-way drivers, RTI panel app, and expansion configurations. Back panel connections enable direct control of devices via IR, IP, and 2 RS-232 ports, 6 voltage sense ports with sense event capabilities, and 4 relays for control via contact closure. This truly is the all-in-one control and automation solution. Let's open it up and see what's inside. The first thing we notice is there is not a physical manual. The manual for the KX4 can be found by scanning the QR code, which will send your device directly to our website to obtain it. The manual will be helpful in explaining everything needed to use the device, including installation, power, and how to use specific outputs, including pinouts. Next, for your installation needs is the included drywall template, so the KX4 fits snug in the wall for retrofit installations. Once we remove these, we see the KX4 with its beautiful 4-inch 480 by 800 pixel capacitive touchscreen display and a surrounding white bezel. You can purchase a black bezel separately if your client desires. We remove the KX4 from the plastic, turn it over, and see all the connection ports available to us. We will get into the hardware details on the device in a bit, so let's move on. As we remove the stability packaging, we see that RTI has included a pair of RJ45 to DB9 serial adapters to allow the direct connection from the dual RS-232 ports on the back of the KX4 to the serial-based devices in use. There is also an extra set of mounting wings, otherwise known as dog ears, in the package, just in case the set already attached to the KX4 are damaged during installation. Finally, 2 ferrite cores are included to be attached to any Ethernet cable connected to the KX4 to prevent electrical disturbances from interfering with power and data lines. Speaking of installation, let's review the 2 recommended methods of installing the KX4 into the location. The first method will be by using the 2 mounting wings, which are ideal in retrofit installations. Once you have determined the correct height and used the included cutout template to mark the location placement of the KX4, cut the wall opening. Now you'll want to remove the bezel, connect all the necessary wires, and insert the KX4. Next, using a drill on a very low torque setting or slowly hand tighten the mounting wing screws located in the front of the unit until it is secure. Do not over tighten, as this could result in damage to the wings or unit. Here's a pro tip. If the included 0.13-inch screw size dog ears break for whatever reason, we have included another set for free in the box. The second installation method is recommended for new build applications. RTI recommends purchasing and using the pre-construction conduit backbox to ensure proper placement and secure installation. This can be purchased directly from your distribution partner or RTI. The part number is 10-210560-15. To install the backbox, check the height placement measurement, place the box on the location, and secure using the proper screws, which is dependent on the substrate. Next, punch out the necessary wiring holes in the bracket, pull the wiring through, and attach the KX4. Remove the outer bezel, unscrew the mounting wings and screws completely, and carefully place the KX4 within the conduit box. The 4 number 632 by 1.5-inch Phillips panhead machine screws included will attach the KX4 to the back box by either a low torque setting drill or hand tightening. Make sure not to over tighten, as this could result in damage to the unit and or back box. Detailed installation documentation can be found on the RTI's dealer site under the Installation Overview tab of the KX4 and the KX4 Backbox product pages. The KX4 includes 5 base keycaps pre-labeled Home, Volume Up, Volume Down, Mute, and Power. The RTI LaserShark software is available on the RTI dealer site, and orders can be placed with us directly. For more information on LaserShark, click the LaserShark engraving link in the Resources tab on the dealer site. To remove the keycaps, gently remove the outer bezel, and using a small screwdriver or fingernail, gently pry up the keycap from the lower right corner. To install the keycap, align it directly over the button location and gently press straight down on the keycap until it is seated flush with the display. Make sure to test the button for functionality. The KX4 has 3 different powering options available. The first is PoE. Wire a shielded Cat5, Cat6 cable from the KX4 Ethernet port to an 802.3 AF compliant Power over Ethernet switch Class 3. Please note, using a non-compliant PoE device may damage the KX4. The second method is through RS-45 control port. Wire a Cat5, Cat6 cable from the KX4 control port to a CB8 input port. The CB8 will be connected directly to the processor's expansion port. The third method is through direct line. Connect a 12 VDC to 16 VDC 0.5 amp power supply to the 12 to 16 VDC and ground terminals of the Phoenix connector on the KX4. Here's an important note though. Do not power the KX4 directly from any XP processor. Doing so could actually damage the unit. Wiring for sensing contact closure and voltage and issuing relay and voltage triggers is straightforward. An important note while making these connections. The Phoenix connector must be unplugged to reach the screws that are used to secure the wiring in the terminal. During the wiring process, place the Phoenix connector into the wiring staging location. After all the wiring is connected, finish installing the Phoenix connector by aligning it with the power sense relay port and pushing it into place. The maximum AWG wire allowed by the KX4 Phoenix connector is 22 AWG. To wire the contact closure as a sense input, connect one of the wires from the device to one of the sense inputs, labeled 1 through 6, and the other wire to the KX4 ground input. To wire for voltage sensing, connect the positive wire from the voltage source to one of the sense inputs labeled 1 through 6, and the negative wire to the KX4 ground input. The KX4 relays provide contact closure or switching control for loads up to 2 amp 30 VDC with 60 watt max each. Relays are normally open when not energized, but they can be programmed to behave normally closed if power is applied to the KX4. First, connect one of the equipment leads to the contact A of the KX4 relay, labeled 1 through 4. Second, connect the remaining equipment lead to contact B of the same relay. Programming will be done in Integration Designer. The KX4 relays can also be used to control voltage triggers, but require additional wiring. An important note, when using a relay as a voltage trigger, the KX4 must be powered via CB8 connecting block or a separate power supply. The voltage trigger will not work when PoE is used. Connect the ground terminal of the KX4 to the ground connection on the equipment to be triggered. Install a 22 AWG jumper wire between the KX4 12 to 16 VDC terminal and the contact A terminal of the relay that is being used to send the voltage trigger. Connect the contact B terminal of the relay to the 12 VDC input on the equipment being triggered. The control and feedback options on the KX4 include the RS-232, RJ45 control port, RJ45 Ethernet, and built-in Zigbee transceiver. The KX4 is capable of 1- or 2-way communication with the supported devices and electronics via standard Cat5, Cat6 cable with RJ45 termination. The 2 RJ45 to DB9 adapters are included. Here's a pro tip. RS-232 communication cabling should be limited to 50 feet or 16 meters. The actual distance, however, will vary depending on the baud rate, so keep that in mind when speccing out the project. RS-232 drivers and codes are found within Integration Designer programming software, but you may also import and build your own databases of codes and access them fully from within the software. The control port on the KX4 uses a Cat5, Cat6 cable with RJ45 termination. When used in conjunction with the RTI control processor like an XP6S and the RTI CB8 connecting block, this port serves as a power source for the KX4 in addition to RS-45 communication or to send infrared codes directly to a device using the pinout seen here. The RJ45 Ethernet port allows connection to a 10100 base T Ethernet LAN. Network settings such as the IP address are configurable within Integration Designer. The Ethernet LAN connection enables communication with the RTI control system, direct control of devices via IP, MJPEG video, RTI panel support, and power over Ethernet. Please note that when powering the KX4 using PoE, an 802.3 AF compliant Class 3 PoE switch must be used. Anything else could result in damage to the unit. The NetLink LED located above the Ethernet port will illuminate if the KX4 is connected to the Ethernet network. The LED will flash intermittently depending on traffic. If you are experiencing communication or power issues when using the Ethernet port, check to make sure this LED is lit. If not, the first step is to check the cabling and termination points of your network cable. If you still have issues, feel free to call tech support. The KX4 has an integrated Zigbee transceiver module. Zigbee is the primary and recommended communication method between RTI control processors and remotes. This connection supports full duplex two-way communication. The KX4 Zigbee can also be used as a repeater or secondary network within a system when added as an expansion processor. We will show you how to program for this in just a moment. For additional information about setting up Zigbee, please refer to the installation guide and testing bundle on the RTI dealer website for installation instructions and best practices using Zigbee. Now let's move on to programming the KX4. As mentioned earlier, this device is incredibly versatile and can be used in numerous applications. We can use it as a controller within a system connected to a main processor, as a standalone processor and controller together, as an expansion processor with controller UI, a standalone expansion processor, or even just to expand the Zigbee network. The one configuration limitation the KX4 does have is that it cannot be a primary main processor and have a secondary expansion processor attached to it via the network. Let's show you how to get the KX4 set up within Integration Designer. We'll begin by opening Integration Designer software and checking to make sure we have the latest version of the software. We can click Help, then check for updates, and see if we are working with the latest version. Next, we need to check the KX4 firmware. There are two methods for this. First is through the direct USB connection. Remove the outer bezel and connect the USB cable between the KX4 and your computer. Next, select Get USB Device Firmware Version from the Communications drop-down menu. To download the new version, log into your dealer account on rticontrol.com and select Firmware under the Resources section. Click on the wired interfaces to find the KX4. The second method is to connect your KX4 to the network. Click on Show Devices on Local Network under the Communications drop-down in Integration Designer. Under the Version section, it will list the firmware version. If this number is in red, then there is a new update available and can be downloaded by clicking on it. Whether you download from the RTI Control website or through Integration Designer. Once the firmware zip file has been downloaded, make sure to extract it and then launch the update wizard. Follow the instructions explicitly, as not doing so could cause damage to the device. As stated earlier, the KX4 can be used as both processor and controller. There are a few different ways we can add it into the system. Let's start with it being used as a standard controller with another XP processor as the main processor. Once the main processor and necessary project rooms have been added, we will click on the Controllers tab in the Add Workspace item window. Select the room which you would like the KX4 to live in. A good rule of thumb is to place a touchscreen controller in the exact room for which it is located. This will help with any future system manager or programming needs. Type KX4 in the search area and select the one that does not say with processor, and press Next. The window will now show the room it is in and the other device information. Additionally, you can select which base template to use for the user interface between Coral and Obsidian. Coral is the most recently released with updated graphics and functionality. You also need to choose between list and button menus for selecting your room activities. Button menus are the most common in projects requiring a more customized user interface approach, whereas list menus are automatically populated with the rooms and/or activities associated with those rooms on the home page automatically. For our example, we will leave it as list menu. Finally, we see the pages that will be created for us on the right-hand side. As you add sources, you can decide here whether to have Integration Designer create the pages associated with those sources or not. Here we see that weather and home pages are going to be created. We click on Add Device, and it is added immediately to the room for which we selected. Once all the rooms, controllers, and sources are added to your project file, you should immediately begin adjusting the properties associated with each one. The KX4 is no different. We click on the KX4 and then select the Properties under the Configuration section. Once we have selected it, a window will open populated with 12 different tabs. Let's go through them all, beginning with the General tab. The General tab is where you can choose how long it takes in seconds for the device to power down after last use, and with no movement to be detected by the proximity sensor. I would typically recommend no less than 20 seconds. The checkbox that is selected next to the Ignore First Press from button down mode allows the device to not initiate any buttons that may issue commands or macros upon being pressed when the device is in power down mode. For example, if the KX4 were in power down mode and a person other than the client went up to it to turn it on by pressing a hard button, the command or macro associated with that specific hard button would not happen unless pressed again by that user. It's almost like an "Are you sure you want to do this?" feature. The second tab is the Backlight tab. This is a very common tab for most RTI touchscreen devices outside of RTI panels. In this tab, you'll be able to enable or disable the proximity sensor and ambient light sensor. You'll notice that if we leave the ambient light sensor checked, we can manipulate the light output level of the KX4 dependent on the active and idle state of the device in both normal and dark light conditions. If I disable the light sensor, I still could adjust the light output level while in active or idle use. The KX4 allows you to place 50 unique WAV file sounds on your device to be used during operation. The Sounds tab allows you to turn them on or off and set the volume level of the button and keypad indication beeper. The beeper sound can use one of the 50 sounds allowed on the device in place of its default. To add a sound, click on the number, then select Change. Find the WAV file that you want to use and press OK. Be warned, sounds can be very useful, like telling those clients that are hard of sight what button is being pushed, but using sounds strictly for entertainment value will quickly deteriorate. Use this feature wisely. The Network tab is where you set the KX4 for communication over the client's network. You have two options for setup, DHCP and static IP. If you are going to use DHCP, we recommend reserving the MAC address to the assigned IP address within the client's network settings so that the processor knows exactly where to find it in case of a restart. If you are using static IP, make sure to double check all the settings you've entered on both the KX4 and the client's network to ensure a secure and correct connection. If you are putting this device on the client's network, we would recommend enabling the Allow this device to be programmed over the network option. The KX4 file can be uploaded directly to it through USB from the programming computer, But by enabling this option, the programmer will be able to upload the program directly to the KX4 through the network, thus saving time. The clock tab is set to use the default settings from the system properties. You of course can disable this and make any changes you deem necessary for this system. The output tab is where we tell the device how it will be communicating with the processor and devices. The output section is how the device will send the trigger codes to the processor to initiate macros. The most common is to use the two-way trigger codes, which uses either network or RS-45 connections. The IR trigger codes are if you need to send trigger codes for macros via IR from a device to the processor. If you're going to be using the IR trigger code, you will need to specify the frequency they are sent by adjusting it here. This way is not used much anymore. The two-way options section is how we tell the system the device will be sending and receiving the two-way information from the processor. For the KX4, the options are Ethernet or RS-45. Ethernet will directly connect to the network, and if you have PoE running, will also power the device. The RS-45 option requires the connection of the KX4 control port to the RTI CB8 connecting block to power the device and receive communication. If the device is not going to be receiving any feedback, you can disable it here by selecting None. We move on to port names now and see from the drop-down menu that I can manually enter in the names for each port available on the KX4. In this case, since the KX4 is only being used as a controller, these options are grayed out. If it was being used as a processor or expansion processor, we would be able to name these for where they are routing the signals to. The Key Labels tab refers to the 5 hard button keys on the KX4. What you name them here will reflect on the device during programming within Integration Designer, but not show on the actual device the client will see. This is labeled in a left to right fashion, with 1 being the far left button on the device and 5 being the far right. Keep in mind that these buttons can be programmed to do just about anything, and you can customize the text and or image on the actual hard buttons by using RTI's Laser Shark engraving. This software can be downloaded. The RTI Laser Shark software can be downloaded from the RTI control site once you have logged into your account. The final set of tabs begins with VoIP and VoIP SIP. Both tabs are features based around intercom communication. RTI devices with VoIP, or Voice over IP, currently support peer-to-peer communication with other RTI devices and third-party devices that support the SIP protocol. The KX4 does have a built-in microphone and speaker, and therefore does have the capability for audio-only calls, as well as the common door station pattern of incoming video with two-way audio. If you would like to use the VoIP option, you will need to enable the feature here. However, VoIP and VoIP SIP have several other settings involved, so we have a dedicated training write-up that can walk you through all the details to get this set up correctly. Log into your RTI control account, navigate to Support, then Technical Documents, and then Technical Bulletins. Scroll till you find it listed under the Control Devices section titled VoIP, Voice over IP, Settings and Configuration. Flag names allow us to name each of the 256 internal logic flags available for programming macros on the device. Flags allow us to create checks and issue commands and macros based on that flag being set and or cleared during the macro sequence process. There is more in-depth training on using flags within RTI Excel and on the RTI support site. No need to name these right away unless you already know that you'll need them. Finally, the Notes section. This allows us to make notes about the installation, programming, or anything else we see fit to write about the device and or project. The client will not see this information as it is only visible within Integration Designer. Here's another pro tip for you. The control panel can also be accessed directly on the KX4 device. You will be able to adjust the backlight, sounds, network infrastructure, timeout, and proximity sensor directly from the touchscreen. This control panel on the device is accessed by pressing and holding down the button located in the lower left corner of the KX4 while applying power or resetting the KX4. As a standard room controller, the KX4 will not allow you access to use the RS-232, relays, or sensing ports directly in standalone mode. If you need to have access to these ports, you will need to set it up as an expansion processor tied to the main processor in the system. To do this, select your main processor. Then the expansion devices, click Add Expansion Device, and then select the KX4 processor. Please note that you must add the KX4 controller into a room first before adding it as an expansion device. Also, to name the RS-232 ports, adjust the relays and sensing ports on the KX4 expansion device, you will still need to go into the main processor's properties in the global area to do so, not the controller's properties. Finally, if you are using the KX4 as an expansion device, it must be connected over the network, not RS-485. If you decide to add the KX4 as an expansion processor, understand that you are gaining access to the ports and internal memory, but not gaining access to additional macro engines or processing capabilities. This means that if you have a project that has many iOS and Android RTI panels or you're using numerous drivers, you can offload these devices and drivers from the main processor memory to the expansion processor memory and thus not risk overloading the main. Finally, as an expansion processor, you will be able to use the KX4's built-in Zigbee antenna as a repeater or create a separate Zigbee network for that area. To create a separate Zigbee network, you will need to go to the System Properties, select the Configure Zigbee and RS-485 networks under the Zone tab, and this will open a window where you will see that the KX4 is already set up as a repeater to the existing Zigbee network. If you want to create a separate Zigbee network, you will need to click on the KX4 and then select Create Network. Once this is done, you will click and drag and drop the appropriate remotes to the respective Zigbee networks. Make sure to power cycle the remotes closest to that new network so that they sync up. Again, we highly recommend you check out the training materials on RTI XL and the RTI technical bulletins on setting up, configuring, and troubleshooting Zigbee. Once you have the KX4 set up within the room, you'll be able to add sources, create activities, and build the user interface based on the client's needs. Integration Designer will take care of much of that programming for you. However, here are a few items that you may need to address. As stated before, the KX4 can send out direct IR commands from the control port via pinout. To make this happen, we will need to add the IR source into the room as a standalone source. Let's open up our workspace window and click on the Infrared tab. We will do a search for Epson projectors and select the code group 1. Then click Next. With it selected, I now will click on the port routing dropdown and select Standalone. Then we'll press Add Device. This now sets that source as a standalone source and enables the KX4 of sending an IR code directly out of the control port pinout. Now, I can't add any standalone IR source codes to the activities, so whatever commands that are needed for the other devices in that room to become functional will be put into the activity pertaining to it. To have the IR commands sent out directly from the device and initiate the activity the client desires, we need to add both to that button. For example, let's select the power button. If I go to the home page and click on the power button, I would need to click on the controller in the macro area. You can only use controller-based macros with standalone direct IR commands. Next, I'm going to change the macro type from System to Standalone. Now I can select the command from the macro steps window and see that the Epson projector we added into the file is available. We'll also add in a trigger for the activity built into the system for the room to launch. The 5 hard buttons can be customized to do whatever the client would like them to do. However, please note that they may have been pre-tagged with the activity home, mute, volume down, volume up, and activity power off names. This means that if you add a source in the room, such as a Yamaha AVR, and make it the room audio source, Integration Designer will auto-program those tagged buttons with the necessary commands. If you want these buttons to do something different, make sure to change the tag name, key label, and then issue the proper command or activity macro to it. For example, if I want the mute button to issue the activity room on, I can change the tag to activity : room on. Then I'll want to change the button label under the properties. Another note about these hard buttons: they are not set as punch-through global keys for tags that you make up. Let's say I change the tag on the home button to bye-bye, and I put a command in it from the Yamaha. If I go to the weather page, you'll see that the tag did not follow. To make this happen, we go back to the home page, right-click on the button itself, and select the option to tag to all pages. This will place that tag for this button on all pages for the device, and thus creating a global punch-through key. The KX4 is capable of frames and not viewports. Frames are an additional way a client can access more page information without the program having numerous pages and layers. The KX4 can have 10 total frames per one page. These are added by clicking on the right arrow key next to the text that states which current frame you are working on. When we click on the right arrow key, you'll see the counter go to 2 of 2 and on for the frames. You'll notice that some buttons have followed to the next frame. This is because when they were created, they were assigned to do so. Let's drag a bitmap onto frame 2. Select Coral Elements from the drop-down in the bitmaps window and type frame. Select the 2-dot image and drag it onto frame 2. Next, we need to tag it. We can use the predetermined tag frame indicator, which will automatically program the indicator with the necessary feedback variable. When I hit enter after typing frame indicator in the tag name area, you can see auto programming kick in and place the controller index variable. The reason that it is a controller variable is that this feedback is pertaining only to this one controller. The variable is indexed because the feedback provided is in the form of images of what will show up based on the numerical value of each frame. Thus, if the client swipes from right to left, the indicator will change the dot image to highlight the current frame. Next, we need to get an image on all frames. Right-click on it, and then select the option to show button on all frames. Once this is selected, if we click on the right arrow key again, the button remains. You can't choose the specific frames it can show up on. It's all or none. Here's a pro tip for you. Do not create the frame indicator until you have added all the necessary frames on that specific page. This will eliminate the need to redo your indicator. Integration Designer makes building projects simple, and one of the coolest ways we can do this is through conversion. We can take a device like the KX4, duplicate it, and make it into a similar type of remote control or PC-based controller virtual panel. This allows you to reduce the overall programming time, but also create similar interfaces across the project, reducing the client's questions on operation and functionality. Make sure to always duplicate the device before converting it to any other device. There are times where you can go up in the device resolution size, but you can't always go down. First, we right-click on the KX4 in the workspace tree, and then select Duplicate. Rename the KX4 for what it will become, and in this case, we'll name it KX4 VP for Virtual Panel. Once we press OK, Integration Designer creates the duplicate device with the name given. We will now click on the KX4 VP device and navigate to the configuration and select Convert to. We will see that the KX4 can be converted to the KX3, T3X, T4X, and Virtual Panel. We will select Virtual Panel. Integration Designer will immediately prompt a warning that if we do this, we may not be able to return to the previous device. We press OK, and it provides a second warning that if we are using frames and converting to a device that doesn't allow frames, like a Virtual Panel, we're going to lose them. This wouldn't be the case if we were using a device like a KX3 or T4X to convert to that do allow for frames. We are OK with this, so we press OK. It converts it, and you will notice that all the hard buttons have disappeared. This is because the device will be an executable file on the client's computer that doesn't have the actual hard buttons. The final item we want to cover in this configuration window is the check memory usage. This will only be needed if you feel that the device is running slow or if you feel you may be creating too many layers and/or pages during development. If we click on it, you'll see what's available versus what's taken up. A large 4-inch 480 by 800 pixel resolution capacitive touchscreen offers ample room for creating the user interface required. To find images capable of being placed on this device, when you navigate over to the bitmaps, make sure to use the filter option to reduce the number of images to only those that will fit your device. The stunning pre-made Coral template in Integration Designer 11 offers complete functionality of the user interface for whichever device is being controlled. Plus, it lets you customize the interface to meet all the needs and requirements of your client. Let's change gears now and create a system using the KX4 as a main processor for the project, but also as a controller. This is where the KX4 really shines. Using it as an independent processor is ideal for single-room solutions such as classrooms, huddle spaces, and conference areas where you cannot connect back to a main processor like an XP8V. The process is the same as building a new project. We open Integration Designer, create a new system file, and then select the KX4 with processor. Once it has been added to the system, it will be known as the main processor. An important note here is that the KX4 can only be converted to a KX3 and vice versa. The internal software code isn't compatible with XP processors and thus is not able to be converted. Let's bring up the properties for the KX4. As you can see, most of the same properties are there that we went through with the KX4 as a controller only. However, we now see the addition of the Location, Relay, and Sense tabs. Let's start with the Location tab. This, like the XP processors, will use the default location as selected during the system properties. If you would like to adjust this, you certainly can by disabling the feature and selecting the location from the list or entering in the specific latitude and longitude coordinates. The port names, although not a new tab, now has been enabled and will allow us to name the RS-232, Relay, and Sense ports on the device. The Relay Mode tab is where we determine how the internal relays will behave. We can choose from normally open or normally closed for each of the 4 relays. This state will depend on the device we are controlling. The Sense Input tab allows us to determine what exactly they are sensing between voltage and contact closure. Keep in mind that you can only select one or the other. Both are not available for simultaneous use. That's all we need to cover for the properties, as all the others were already covered in the training. Let's move on to the events available for the XP processor. Events for the KX4 as a processor are no different from the XP processors. These are currently not available since we do not have a macro or source built into the system yet. Let's quickly click on the global room, then the macro list, and create a new macro titled Open Doors. Then create another 3 macros titled Sprinklers, Occupancy Sensing, and finally another called Startup. Let's now go back to the KX4 with processor and click on Events. You still have available Sense, Periodic, Daily, and Startup automations. Keep in mind that driver-based automation events are determined by what kind of information the driver can receive and send from the device it's communicating with. Here's a quick summary of the 4 events on the processor. We'll begin with Sense events. Sense events trigger automation-based macros when the processor's voltage or sense inputs are triggered. For example, if the processor senses that the service door is open because the contact closure on port 1 isn't complete or is in a normally high state, we could have a macro automatically run to notify us that the door is open when the sensor goes low or not shut. A periodic event allows us to have a macro run every certain number of minutes or seconds and notify us if it doesn't meet the requirements. For example, you could have the KX4 check an occupancy sensor every 15 minutes. When the macro runs, it will see if there is currently personnel in the conference room and can keep the lights on if so. And if not, the room off macro sequence will run. A daily event allows automation events to occur at a specific time or time frame between sunrise or sunset to trigger macros to run. For example, you could have the system run a macro every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday to water the lawn 30 minutes before sunrise. Finally, startup events. Startup events are used to get everything back to square one if the processor has a power cycle. For example, if you're using toggle commands and there is a power outage, the startup event could run those checks and issue the commands so that the macros are back in sequence with the devices they are controlling. Before we leave the processor configuration, we need to mention the importance of using RTIQ remote system management. Every project should have this enabled. It allows you to monitor the system in the field and get notifications if there are issues, so you can take the necessary steps to correct them in a timely manner, either remotely or by running a truck. It's a free remote monitoring service from RTI, so make sure to let customer service know if you want it enabled on your account, and then with every project to be sure to enable it on the processor. There's a full training on how RTIQ gets set up and all the features surrounding it on RTI Excel and in the technical documents. Now that we have the KX4 set up as a processor, we can also add it in as a controller within the area room selected. Click on Add New Device button in the Workspace window. You will see there are 2 listings for the KX4, one with the processor and one without. The KX4 controller with processor is the one that will be the same as the KX you are using as the main processor. We choose the room where it will reside and press OK. Next, we decide on the template, menu structure, and pages. Then name it for where it is and press Add Device. Once we have added this controller, it will no longer be listed in the controller list. We can continue to add additional KX4s into the system, but they are only controllers. In summary, the versatility and capabilities of the KX4 make it a game changer. They offer you the ability to set up a client with a full automation and control system that is completely scalable for both commercial and residential solutions. In particular, the KX4 is uniquely designed to be your go-to control solution for conference rooms, huddle spaces, classrooms, lecture halls, and other single-room environments. RTI integrates with the devices and systems commonly used in these applications and enables complete customization so you can set yourself apart from the competition while delighting your clients every time. Thanks for watching and happy selling.